So, as we've seen from the Movement NetLab video, our movements have patterns that are identifiable over time, and we can do this through historical analysis and also from the vantage point of the moment that we're in now. These patterns have implications for both the emotional well-being of people within movements and what movements should help to achieve in any specific moment. If we're aware of the movement life cycle and able to identify where our movement is at in it, we'll be much better placed to take strategic action and to care for ourselves and for others. Often we make the mistake of seeing movements for systemic change as linear. So we think that they have a clear endpoint at which we have won and we can all go home. Angela Davis, Bill Moyer, and a host of other movement analysts have reminded us that it's much more useful and realistic to think of movements as having natural cycles or seasons, which we can engage with and take advantage of. The Movement NetLab model shows us that movements actually kind of grow, and we can think about that as either cycles or spirals, which I'll say more about later, in ways that we can predict and to some extent even influence. Whether we know it or not, it's likely that all of us have experienced a shift in the movement life cycle. And it's important to remember that as humans, we are emotional beings, and there is a real emotional element to this model. It's about understanding what's going on for us, what's going on for us kind of inside and the rhythms that the movement life cycle might put us through. And this will help us to address and manage things like conflict or burnout or despair, because we're really conscious about what stage we're in, and also, most importantly, that it's not going to last forever. So one piece I'm going to kind of drill down on in a second is trigger events and go into the 3 different types of trigger events. But before I do that, just to quickly say that people often think about movements as only existing in the peak or honeymoon phase. So often when you ask people to describe a social movement, the example that they bring will be from that moment. So it might be the Iraq War where millions of people were out on the streets, or the George Floyd protests last summer where the protests were all over the world. And what's less likely that people will talk about are the other periods. So the periods of contraction, actually after the millions of people have gone home, and you just have these kind of deep movement organizations that are still trying to sign people up. They're still trying to do that frontline work. But all of that is crucial movement work as well. And learning about the movement life cycle can initially feel a bit disheartening, right? It can feel that it's some ways inevitable that this cycle will play out. There will be a moment of the whirlwind, and everyone will be excited, and then contraction will come and disillusionment. But as I said, it's really actually empowering if we think about the movement life cycle as a spiral. So instead of a cycle that just goes round and round, we start in a different place every time. We're a bit further ahead, we're a bit better equipped to deal with that period of contraction and to deal with that disillusionment, and maybe even make it a bit shorter and a bit easier to bear. And crucially, we're also much more empowered to take strategic action in the right way. So, for example, if we're a migrant rights organization that provides frontline support in a moment of the whirlwind, the strategic action that we decide to take might be very different from the strategic action we decide to take in a moment of contraction or disillusionment. You know, when you're experiencing a contraction in the movement, it's not the best time to try and absorb lots of new members or hold a big rally. It might actually be a really good time to just take care of each other, to check in on how you're doing, to document some of your resources, or God forbid, give people a break. So when we're developing movement conscious strategy and we're thinking about the life cycle as part of that, it makes us much more effective movement actors. So just to talk then about the 3 types of trigger event. So the first type of trigger event is an event that is unexpected and unplanned. It's when something external happens in which the public outcry makes it a trigger event. So an example of this is the murder of Trayvon Martin or the Aberfan disaster in Wales. This is when something happens which is so terrible, so outrageous, that people take to the streets and say enough is enough. A crucial thing to name around the first type of trigger event is whether or not it becomes a trigger event often depends on who cares about it. So there are many events that lots of communities have been saying for a long time are trigger events, but it's not until people with more structural or social rank start to join the cause that it becomes a trigger event and generates a moment of the whirlwind. So that's a really key piece there about how movement energy and privilege can intersect. The second type of trigger event is an external event with a planned response. So this is when the movement or organisers within it anticipate something that might be coming down the pipe by scanning the political weather, and they plan a response to make it into a trigger event. So an example of this is the poll tax riots. And this is a really good example of how movements can anticipate something coming if they're really kind of taking notice of what's going on and super movement conscious, and for a lack of a better word, kind of capitalize or take advantage of that to turn it into a moment of movement uprising. The final type of trigger event is an organized trigger event. So this is one in which members of the movement organize a trigger event to make the invisible suffering visible. So an example of this is the migrant strike, One Day Without Us. And this is I think this is a really empowering element of the movement life cycle, because it shows us in a very instrumental way just how much we can take control of that life cycle. You know, if we're in a period of enduring crisis, there are things that we can do to push it into that uprising moment, to push it into the honeymoon or the peak. We don't have to wait until something unbearable, something terrible happens, or we hear about a draconian piece of legislation. We can and do take the power ourselves to push the movement forward. So those are the key points on the movement life cycle. Again, just to lift up, it has both kind of strategic implications and emotional ones. But overall, it's a really powerful tool for thinking about how to build big, sustainable social movements that are going to be more effective than the sum of its parts.